And welcome, welcome. My name is Ryan Belmore. I didn't do the long start, which Frank loves. And
Yeah,
this is Frank Prosnitz. And Frank and I are What's Up Noop. And it's been a while, but we are getting back to our author series.
back to the author series and lots of video casts coming up. So it'll be good, and we'll try to get some more authors. Today is very exciting. Jan Brogan, who is a former Providence Journal reporter. She is a an award-winning reporter, won the Gerald Loeb Award for Distinguished Business Writing while at the Journal, and is the author of a number of novels. Four novels, and now the book called The Combat Zone: Murder, Race, and Boston's Struggle for Justice, getting lots of reviews. It's also up for an award, and it's great to have Jan with us today.
And there is Jan. Hi, Jan.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's amazing when technology works.
And it's so confusing when it doesn't.
Well, Jan, it's great to have you this morning, and great to talk about your new book and your other books as well.
Great, awesome.
You worked at the Journal from during what time?
Well, I worked from 1984, I think, and then I was, full time till about 88, and then I left for a little bit, and then I came back and I was a part-time staff member till 2001.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm an old Journal alum as well. It doesn't get me much at the grocery store, but
But still, a great place to work. It was a great.
Yeah, well, it was one of the finest newspapers around, and what I really appreciated, well, we had really good editors, and that taught you more about writing and reporting than anything else.
Yeah, it did. It did.
You
They
know,
had editors there.
Al Johnson was the city editor when I was on the city staff of the Journal, and he's the guy who was in every journalism movie, that crusty old city editor, and he didn't let you get away with much. Great editor, great editor.
Great place to work.
Let's go backwards a little bit. No, let's start from here, and let's talk about The Combat Zone. This book is nonfiction.
It is nonfiction. It is. It's about the 1976 murder of a Harvard football player in Boston's old combat zone, which was its red light district, during the height of racial violence during busing. Although it has nothing to do with busing, but it somehow became entwined with everything else that was going on in Boston, and it was a devastating. It was a huge. It was the most highly publicized murder in Massachusetts in the 1970s, and it became kind of a political football. But it changed the way. There were two, I think, flawed trials, but it changed the way juries were chosen in Boston and ended what had been a long time, and not just Boston practice, but national practice of striking blacks from juries. Striking blacks from juries, particularly when the defendants were black.
What brought you to that subject? You've been writing novels and now turning to a nonfiction piece.
Yeah. So after I wrote my last murder mystery, which was Teaser, and they were all set in Rhode Island, I felt like I really, I felt like I knew I had learned how to write mysteries. And I also felt like I was making up these terrible things for people to do. I was just like, as if there wasn't enough crime in the world, I was making up more of it. And I started saying, I know I can write. I know I can write a novel. I know I can make stories, but I want to find a story that needs to be told, and one that I'm particularly well suited to tell. So I said that at enough cocktail parties, and someone came up to me when I was in Costco and said, Danny Popolo, and that's the younger brother of the victim, is looking for a screenwriter. And I knew who he was. And I said, why is he looking for a screenwriter? And he said, because he's, his brother was, you remember Andy Popolo, the Harvard football player who was murdered in the combat zone? I was like, oh, I remember. I was only like a college freshman at the time, but I was like, oh, I remember. I didn't remember the details, but I remembered how big an event it was. So I went back and I Googled it, and then I wound up meeting with Danny. And I said to him, I have written screenplays, but I've never really like written one successfully. I've never written one that was made into anything or it was even bought by anybody. So, but they had a director, the director of Spin City and Home Improvement, who had gone to Harvard with Andy, and but they didn't have any money for a screenwriter. So I said, look, I will do it on spec. And we have a written agreement, but I want to be able to do the book afterwards. And, I'll do the screenplay your way. But when I write a book, I'm a journalist. So it's got to be how I see events. And we reached that agreement. And as I predicted, movie never got made. But I started on the book. And that's how but at the time, I was intrigued. I was drawn to it because of the family's grief, because they had what they thought was justice, and then it was taken away from them, and they were real, and because the trial seesaw, and that's what first drew me. But as I got into it, I learned two things. I learned that it was the case that changed the way juries were chosen in Massachusetts, and then that impacted the Supreme Court decision in 1986. It was one of the precedent cases. One of two precedent cases that changed the way it is nationally. And then I also learned that although I don't really feel Andy got to, the Popolo family doesn't feel like they got justice, and you can make an argument that they did not. But there were a lot of other people not getting justice, and a lot of them were Black victims. So the criminal justice system needed to change, and through this really terrible murder, which also is often cited as the reason Boston finally came down on the combat zone. And Boston was crazy in the 1970s, and the combat zone was wild. I mean, it was wild. It was like the New York Times called it a sexual Disneyland. But it wasn't just that. It was the police corruption, and the crime was just intense. I mean, women were soliciting. They were having sex in the alleys. They were stopping cars to sell drugs and to transact. And traffic would be on a Saturday night. There would be 60 prostitutes outside the strip clubs. Strip clubs were finding ways to charge, so people could charge sexual acts on their credit cards. The pickpocketing and the mugging and the knifing was just intense. So,
how would you, as a journalist, if you were writing it for a news story in the paper versus writing the book, how does that differ? How does that process differ?
Well, one thing I learned a lot from all the research I did was that we often get small details wrong when we cover crimes that happen, and those small details get picked up and repeated and become part of the narrative, and they are very different from what you learn when you attend the trial or when you read the court transcripts like 3 times, as I did. For example, one of the things that became part of the narrative was, and this was, it's not real. The journalists, this is what people are saying initially, this is what they're picking up, that he got murdered because he went to the combat zone and he chased a prostitute and tried to get his wallet back. It was pickpocketing. Now that's untrue. What happened was the whole Harvard football team went down there together because it was part of the Harvard ritual. They did go to a strip show, which, is totally within their rights. As they were leaving, not Andy, not the victim. He was in a car ready to go home. He'd gone back to his car. He was in the back seat. He was ready to go home. Another group of Harvard football players got, they used to have these, they called them, and this is a terrible term, but they called them robber whores. They were young women. They were either prostitutes or dressed like prostitutes who would stand outside of the strip clubs. And as the guys walked by or they came out drunk, they would cozy up to them and fondle them and steal their wallets. It was a pickpocketing scam. So, and this was very well known in the zone. It was reported on extensively. And so another football player lost his wallet. They wound up, the young woman, and she was only 16, wound up getting into the Harvard equipment van and jumping out after a couple minutes with the wallet. But Andy had nothing to do with that. The only reason he got involved, there was a fight that started up at the T station. And then when a knife came out, the Harvard football players ran back to their van. They got chased. And Andy only got involved when he saw a guy getting pummeled and no one helping him. And he jumped in to help him. He came out of his car to see what was going on, and he jumped in to save a teammate. But that's not the narrative that got told. So, and so I guess, and I have to say, a lot of the reporting at the trial was good, and that's really complicated. And I think, but mistakes are made, and so I guess I would never believe, particularly in a highly publicized trial, I would never believe all the details you hear in the early reporting.
Do you think one of the problems for that reporter on a daily paper or in a daily product, it's the deadline, the fact that you've got to get it out, and especially now when there's such competition, this is no longer a daily thing; it's really a by-minute thing almost.
Yeah, I mean the deadline pressure is intense, and also there's, in a highly publicized trial, so much information is coming out that it's what you choose. It's what you choose to report. So I think in the crush of something big like this, there's a lot of misreporting based on the fact that there's a lot of the information that's coming out isn't accurate either. So
okay.
Yeah.
I just checked in with our friends at Charter Books in Newport, who sponsored this author series, and I forgot to mention that at the beginning. But I checked in, and I'll run it on the bottom. They have the book in hardcover and paperback. It's available at charterbookstore.com or right there at 8 Broadway. I just wanted to make a point. And I'm sure we're also going to find out other places to find it, but I also just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Don't buy it in hardcover. Don't buy it in hardcover. No. It's actually it's produced by my publisher is an academic press, UMass Press, and academic publishers put this ridiculously high price on the hardcover because they sell it to each other universities. So don't buy the hardcover. Buy the paperback. Or the audio book is also coming out next month. But buy the paperback. Yeah.
I just had one more follow-up. When Jan was explaining what it was like in Boston, I started watching this series on HBO called We Own This City, which is about the Baltimore police and how chaotic and how out of control it was. And it reminds me, I haven't gotten through the series, but it reminds me a lot of that.
As an aside, when before I came up to the Journal, I went down to interview in Baltimore at the Baltimore News American, which was a Hearst paper at the time, and that was when the city was just beginning to change. But that was a tough city, and what happened is they I was like 23 years old. I get a call from the editor when I get home, and he says, "I don't know what to tell you, but there's a picket line out in front of the building." I said, "Well, call me when the strike is over." By then, I was up at the Journal. But I remember Baltimore, and I had friends who worked at the Sun when that was a really tough city. And I often thought that there were a lot of correlations between what Baltimore was and what Boston and the combat zone were.
Yeah. So if you really want to feel better about what's going on today, go do a lot of research on the 1970s. Because the 1970s were a mess, and northern cities were a mess. They were really poor. Everybody had moved. The middle class had moved out to the suburbs. This is the beginning of manufacturing going, and in Boston, finance and education hadn't come back to fill in the gaps. So the cities are really poor. In 1976, this is the year that New York was teetering on bankruptcy, and there was all the trash in the streets not getting delivered. Nobody thought that you could give away downtown property, right? So where the combat zone now is, it was really poor. So these industries could flourish, and which is their adult entertainment. But the other thing is the racism and the violence was intense, and the police corruption there's an argument to be made that the police corruption had a major factor in this murder.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to the guy who was the police superintendent at the time, and DeGrazio, and we had an interview, and he said he'd been hired to clean up the police department, but he had no idea. He came to believe it was the single most corrupt police department in the nation. He was so corrupt, and that's part of the book. He actually started his own secret investigation into his own department and publicized it. The things that the cops were doing, I mean, they were on the take. He estimated that 50% were on the take. And this is also the glory days of the mob, which was true in Rhode Island as well. This is when, the Godfather movies had been out only a few years. People, everyone looked up to the mob. They were doing they were doing what they wanted in Boston, and they couldn't be stopped yet. So the mob plays a big factor in this book as well.
It was also in the aftermath of race riots. We had a lot of race riots in the years prior to that. How much did that play into it?
Well, everyone was angry. And also, this is the second year of forced busing in federally mandated busing in Boston. So everyone is furious. I mean, their kids are getting bused into bad neighborhoods. That it's all coming down on the poorer working class. And when the first year that they kept statistics on how many the incidents of racial violence, black on white, white on black, it was something like 600 incidents in a single year. That's just what's getting reported. And that's violence. We're not talking about, safe spaces or microaggressions. We're talking about real violence. Houses were being firebombed. There was a threat to blow up the bridges. This is almost like not just racial violence. This is like a racial war. So it's intense. And, when you live through it, you kind of, you were desensitized to it. But when you look back on it and you compare it to now, you're like, wow, everybody was angry. And Boston was so segregated, and, blacks couldn't go into a white neighborhood and not get beat up. As a matter of fact, one of the things that came out of the report, there are a few cops who used to, have sex with the black prostitutes, and in the combat zone. And when they were done, they would drop them off in Southie and beep the horn as they were going, so that in the hopes that she would get beaten up. I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, I can recall, and just as an aside, when I was at the Journal, I'm working in just came to the Journal, working in the Greenville office, and we had a black reporter in the Greenville office. And I remember the cops, a lot of the things they said about a black reporter, and then he was leaving. He was looking for his black identity. He was going to the Calling Post in Cleveland, but he and his wife had no place to stay the night before they were leaving. I said, well, come and stay at my place. It's fine. Wouldn't do it for fear of the kind of ramifications I would get as a result of having somebody black staying in my place. That was incredible. And that was that was in the 70s.
Yeah. The 70s were not evolved. They were it was a bad decade.
So Jan, this is your first nonfiction. What's different about a nonfiction book and approaching it and doing all that research to writing a novel?
So, well, you don't have to make anything up. You have to be very, very concerned about the people you're portraying. You have to be accurate. But that said, because I started this as a screenplay, it's structured very much like a novel. People say it reads like a novel, because I use that 4-act structure. And a part of this book is, when we started the screenplay, I said, and the director said, Andy Popolo, the victim, can't be a protagonist because he dies in Act 1, Scene 1. And Danny, part of this book is, the victim was from the North End, which was the Massachusetts headquarters for the mob, and they have nothing to do with the mob, but once this murder happens, they hear whispers that, okay, the mob is going to they're going to avenge this murder. I mean, one of the reporters told me they didn't think there would be a trial because they were all convinced that the mob was going to kill these guys in jail because for the honor, this is how much everyone believed in the honor of the mob, because this was a North End hero. And Danny is 19 at the time, and his brother is his hero. And he's hearing all this, that they're going to avenge the murder in it. And of course, it never happens. And then through the trial, he begins to believe that it's his job to seek revenge. He believes that it's up to him as the younger brother to get revenge. And a lot of this book is about his struggle with revenge and how it evolves over and so the story of Danny and the story of the city get interwoven. And in some ways, Danny, I didn't realize this when I was writing it, but afterwards I realized that he's almost a metaphor for the city. He's really personally victimized by the racism and the violence of the times, and he has to struggle with this idea. He has to come to terms with some of these things that go on in the criminal justice system, and he evolves. He does evolve. He understands, and like the city of Boston, he gets better, but he never perfectly heals. I mean, Boston still has trouble with racism, and it's not like it's fixed or by any means, but it's a lot better than the 70s.
Let's go back to your history a little bit. When did you first consider a career in journalism?
So I decided I was going to be a writer in first grade, which, when you think about it, is pretty much when you learn to write. So the first thing I did, I glommed onto. And I just decided I would be a writer. And then my father had been a politician. I grew up in New Jersey. He had been a city councilor for 10 years. So he had a lot to do with the press. And he said, and it's funny because he actually sued the press for libel and won. It was the reigning case before New York Times versus Sullivan. But he said to me, a really practical way to use writing is to become a journalist. So I took journalism, and we actually I had a huge high school. We actually had a journalism class you could take in high school. So I took that, and we had to do a story. And my father knew a cop who had been convicted, and then I think he was acquitted for a murder, but he was involved in a big murder case where he was charged with murder. And he did an interview. I got to interview him and profile him, which was a pretty good first story, And so from there, I just went to journalism school at BU, and I never changed my mind.
Your first journalism job was where?
At the Waltham News Tribune, which is on 128. I covered Watertown. And then they had the typographers struck, and we had to honor their picket lines, and then they wound up firing all of us. And then I went to the Worcester Telegram, and I was there for 4 or 5 years. And then I went to the Providence Journal.
And then you left the Journal in the late 80s.
Yeah, well, I had children. I had 2 kids. So, but the Journal was awesome. They said, "Why don't you come back and do?" First, I just did some assignments. Then they put me on part-time staff. And it was a great job when I had, having kids. I didn't have to go in. I live outside of Boston, so I worked there for a long time until I got my first novel contract, and then and my mother was sick at the time, and I was going back and forth to New Jersey. So then I quit. But
what motivated you to start writing novels?
I always knew I wanted to get back to novels. I mean, that's what I decided I want to do in first grade. So it was just a matter of when I got back there. And my husband said to me when I had kids, he said, "Look, you always wanted to you said you're going to write novels. Now's the time." So I did.
So you've written 4, right? You've written The Final Copy, Confidential Source, Yesterday's Fatal, and Teaser.
Yeah, I've written 4 that have been published. But I've got the first one that never got published, and one that I'm trying to sell now.
And the Confidential Source, I see on your webpage that it's under development for a television series.
Yeah, so Michael Carenti, who did Federal Hill. He's the Rhode Island
Sure.
record producer. So he contacted me, and he wanted to, and he wanted to do it as a TV show. So he did a screen, and he got Steven Soderbergh to buy it. And so they actually bought the rights and the options on all my novels, and it was very close to getting developed right before COVID hit, and now I think it's in limbo. But that was very exciting and a really great thing to be involved.
With the potential of being resurrected.
You hope so, like you hear, Meghan Markle just lost her contract, right? So, you never know. Yeah, like I always take this, TV and movies with a grain of salt, because it's wonderful. I mean, I got paid. They paid me, a lot of good money for it, and I hope it gets made. But I'm not, I'm not living or dying by it.
What's next?
Well, I just finished a novel on, which is kind of my heart, about the women, the wives who went whaling with their husbands during the in the 1800s, and I've always been I've been fascinated. I used to be a sailor, so I've always been fascinated by these women who lived their whole lives in a small little town and got on a ship and went to dine with cannibal kings in the Pacific. So I've always been fascinated by them. So I wrote a novel about three women, and more of them did it than people realize. It wasn't just a one-off. It was what they did because the whaling, the voyages were so long, like as whales got depleted. So the end of whaling is like one of the big killers of whaling, aside from the petroleum, was the Civil War. And a lot of people don't realize that during the Civil War, the South, the Confederacy, had raiding ships that went out and destroyed whale ships. I mean, because whaling was like they were like the Exxon, of their time. So I set this. It's kind of a war, and there's a mystery in it too. But it's a big book. So I'm currently trying to get it sold.
Excellent. Anything else you think we should know about you, about your work?
Well, that all the murder mysteries are all set in Rhode Island. And the Combat Zone it does read like a novel. So I would like to promote it, and then it's the audio book is coming out next month. And also there's also a mystery, like a fictional mystery that's come out in January, that's based on the same murder. And it's called Hush Hush by Gabriel Vardan. And it's interesting because you see what someone does with reality, and it's completely altered.
And you also teach at BU during the summer.
So, yeah, I teach journalism at the Boston University. Now they're calling it the Journalism Academy. They used to call it the Journalism Institute, which I love because I love working with teenagers. I love it. It's a great program, and it's very intensive, but it's a lot of fun.
And I'm going to throw this out that hopefully after you're done with that, and we've talked, that you're going to come on board and do some writing for us.
I would absolutely love it. I already have gotten a few ideas.
Oh, wonderful! That's wonderful.
So
we will talk, and we'll have a lot of fun. This is a What's Up Noop. Close your ears, Ryan. Is a really pretty good place to be involved with. I've been a few years now, and just really enjoyed it, and enjoyed the people that we have working with us, and the ability to be able to do an awful lot without a lot of shackles. You have the opportunity to cover a tremendous amount, not just Newport, but all over New England.
Right. Awesome.
Frank, you must be going on 6-7 years now.
Must be something like that.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
I was 12 when I started to.
A couple points. Michael Correnti, we did an event with him right before COVID in the Farley Brothers. We screened outside Providence.
I was there.
There you go.
Yeah.
And my other one, which is the most important question, that somehow Frank, I think he lets me ask it every time. Where can we find out more about you? Where can we find out more about all of your books?
Okay, so www.janbrogan.com. And the books are available at in independent bookstores and on Amazon and the rest. But
including charter books.
yes, right. So if you can buy it through an independent bookstore, because that's the heart and soul of the industry.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you what, Jen, offline, I can connect you with the owner of Charter Books. He does a lot of author events.
I would love that. I would love an excuse to go to Rhode Island.
Yes.
I would absolutely love to do that.
All right. I'm just writing down your website, and we will make sure that we get that out there. Frank, did you have anything else?
Thank you so much.
No, I'm good. Again, it's great to talk to you and great to learn about the book and about you. And really look forward to all of us working together after the summer.
Me too. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. And Frank Proudness, we are back on the author train.
We are. That was, I'm gonna just throw it out there real quickly. Jan is going to be a great addition for us. We have a couple of other people who are coming on board with some really good writing and reporting experience. And What'sUpNewp is we just keep rolling. Here's the thing about it, that people, they're not just coming on board because they're going to get rich. I don't think that's going to happen, but they're coming on board because they like What'sUpNewp. These are people who are out there who have been professional reporters and writers for some time, who like the product and want to be a part of it. And I think that's pretty exciting.
Excellent. I can cancel my flight for this afternoon. I can just float now to my destination.
There you go.
This big head that you just gave me.
Save a little money, right?
But in all seriousness, I wrote, I think last week or earlier this week, I don't know. I feel like I write 24/7, but none of this is me. It's all about a community of writers and contributors. And the reason we've got to year 10 and a half now is because of everybody who contributes. So we look forward to continuing to build our team and provide different voices, some diversity, some different professional experience and things like that. So looking forward to it. The book, janbrogan.com, Charter Books, charterbookstore.com, and you can check out all of that. Mr. Proudness, thank you very much, my friend.
Well, thank you, and have a good trip.
Thank you. I will make sure that I'll call you up and you can just, give me some more compliments.
Okay.
All right. On behalf of Mr. Frank Proudness, as well as myself, all of us here at What'sUpNewp, we want to thank Jan Brogan for joining us. As part of our author series, we also want to thank Charter Bookstore. Charter Bookstore is located at 8 Broadway. And you can stop in, get a book, and check out all that they are offering over there. Thanks for watching.